accepting by faith is a work itself. You must take an affirmative act in order to be saved. It's not a mere gift. If you don't act, you get nothing other than condemnation. 30th. In Acts 9:5, Paul said on the road to Damascus, "Who are you, Lord?" And the Lord said, "I am Jesus, whom thou persecute." The obvious question this should create in the mind of any intelligent observer is, why would Paul ask who is speaking when he called the speaker Lord? He must have known who was speaking. If not, why did he call him Lord? How could he not have known? 31st. In Galatians 5:3, Paul says, "Again I declare to every man who lets himself be circumcised that he is obligated to obey the whole law." Luke 2:21, Philippians 3:5, and Acts 16:3 show that Jesus, Paul, and Timothy, respectively, were all circumcised and obligated to keep the whole law. Yet, Jesus and Paul ignored significant parts of it. 32nd. In Hebrews 10:5-10, Paul said, "When Christ came into the world, he said," that is, he said to God, "Sacrifice and offering you did not desire, but a body you prepared for me. Sacrifices and offerings, burnt offerings and sin offerings you did not desire, nor were you pleased with them. Then he said, Here I am. I have come to do your will." He sets aside the first to establish the second. And by that will, we have been made holy through the sacrifice of the body of Jesus Christ once and for all. Unquote. Paul's quoting Psalm 46, which says God does not want sacrifices to himself. And yet, he also quoted Jesus as alleging that one final sacrifice is needed. There are no bounds to Paul's ability to extract from the Old Testament the sense he desires. Here he goes so far as to find a demonstration of the necessity of the sacrifice of Christ in a psalm passage, 46, which clearly affirms that God does not desire sacrifices, but prefers obedience to his will. 33rd. The cunning and deception of Paul are further exposed by his comments while on trial before the Sanhedrin. Realizing that some of his accusers were Sadducees and others were Pharisees, he called out in Acts 23:6-8, "My brothers, I am a Pharisee, the son of a Pharisee. I stand on trial because of my hope in the resurrection of the dead." When he said this, a dispute broke out between the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and the assembly was divided, because the Sadducees say that there is no resurrection, and that there are neither angels nor spirits, but the Pharisees acknowledge them all. In Acts 24:21, Paul repeats this charge. When one need only read Acts 21:28 and 24:5 to see that the actual charges were quite different. Paul wasn't being truthful in the courtroom in order to create arguments among his accusers and derail the trial. 34th and lastly, in Galatians 1:18, Paul says, he's saying this while discussing his conversion on the road to Damascus, "After 3 years I went up to Jerusalem to see Peter and abode with him 15 days." Unquote. 3 different New Testament accounts in Acts 9, 22, and 26 state that Paul went to Jerusalem shortly after he left Damascus not 3 years later. So in essence, another obvious conclusion to be drawn from Paul's comments is that he often had a bad case of foot and mouth disease. He was far more interested in propagating a philosophy than propounding the truth. We would like to conclude today by reading another critical letter. The writer states, "The approach adopted by Madame Murray O'Hare seems to be more consistent with free thought." She states, in essence, that it is best to throw the Bible in the trash. She doesn't want her constituency, that is her followers, to be dragged to a book that will thwart their atheistic agenda, unquote. My response to this was, you'd like for us to adopt that policy, wouldn't you? Sloughing off the book by simply saying it should be thrown in the trash is hardly realistic. Practically speaking, all that would mean is that freethinkers would refrain from all criticisms of the Bible and give its proponents free rein. It certainly is not consistent with free thought, as was shown in the exchange which occurred between O'Hare and myself in the 16th issue of our publication. I have said it many times before, and I will say it again. People are not going to come to what we have until they are first convinced that what they already have is false. Why would people listen to freethinkers when they're already convinced they have the truth? We're not going to progress very far as long as they mistakenly believe that they are correct. First, you must show them the massive error of their ways before they will begin to realize that they have embarked upon a journey to nowhere, and before they will realize or become open to alternatives. And that takes time, effort, study, and communication. Unfortunately, there is some truth in one of your broad criticisms of freethinkers in your prior letter. We too have encountered a sizable amount of laziness, indifference, timidity, and apathy, and that is why we have so often criticized the throwing rocks at a distance approach. You have to get into the book and know its contents before you can critique it with any degree of accuracy. And for most freethinkers, that is more than their stomach can endure. Also, far too many freethinkers have never realized that having the truth by no means assures success and persuasiveness. Money and numbers can often overcome reality almost indefinitely. Give religionists and biblicists enough money and diligent workers, and they will be able to make anything look possible, no matter how absurd. After all, if people will believe that individuals can rise from the dead, sticks can turn into serpents, donkeys can talk, women can turn into pillars of salt, and iron axe heads can float, what could possibly be too impossible or incredible? Anybody willing to accept that silly nonsense will believe in anything. Nothing is too ridiculous as long as it is dressed up in rationalizations, obfuscations, justifications, and scientific perversions. Given enough resources, there is nothing so preposterous that a sizable body of people can't be convinced it's true. That completes our presentation, and please join us later for the 80th edition of Biblical Errancy Commentary, when we'll continue showing why the Bible is nothing more than the flawed composition of some fallible human beings. Thank you for listening.